Alright, what's poppin', people? We're back. I'm gonna do another one of these lovely Pokemon Spotlight videos for NU. And unfortunately today, it is time we acknowledge this demon bug known as Ninjask. A Pokemon that, throughout much of the generation, I was consistently, along with some other users like Eternally, consistently shitting on it and not, being sold on the actual viability of this Pokemon. I think a lot of the time throughout this generation, I had viewed Ninjask as a Pokemon that was mostly a product of it and not a driving force within it. What I mean by that is, I view Ninjask as something that just ended up fitting decently enough into the metagame by supporting breakers, but that it wasn't actually doing much beyond that. I felt that Ninjask was a pivot that was kind of annoying to punish beyond helmet damage, and that benefited from things like heavy duty boots being in the generation to enable it to freely pivot without worrying about the rock's weakness. But beyond that, I didn't feel that it offered a whole lot. However, I'm willing to say that I've at least become more open to it being an actually good Pokemon within, past month or so. So I'll try to talk about this Pokemon now. But of course, before we get too much into the video, I must remind you all to subscribe. Please. I'm begging you, please. We're at what? We're getting close to 150, which is kind of a benchmark, right? And obviously, I'd like to hit 250 by the end of the year, so hey, if you can help me out on this incredible quest, then hey, I'm all for it. So Ninjask, I think again, it's been a very polarizing Pokemon. Think back to say April. I feel like there were maybe two people using Ninjask on the ladder. There was Mary Annabelle, who has used Ninjask, I'm pretty sure, on every team that he's ever made. And then there was some other user whose name I don't remember for the life of me. I almost want to say it was the guy who I still kind of see in the room occasionally, AOU, I think that was his name. AOU and twice or something. But I remember both of them using it a lot. And that was back before people were using the boot set at all. They were, because there's no dual wing beat yet. So it was always protect, U-turn, acro, sword stance. And I was not sold at all on that Pokemon way back then, man. I think around that time, in terms of the viability ranking thread even, there was huge dispute as to whether or not Ninjask was even worth putting on there. I think we had initially put it at around C+, and then we unranked it, and then we put it back on at around C+. But no one had been sold at all on that Pokemon, and it was because, at the time, there was a whole bunch of Stunfisk Galar running around. I think we even got Rotom added to the tier. Around the time, Rotom Fan, even, if you want to talk about non-base Rotom, that was in the tier. I think just in general, there were a lot of Pokemon around that, well, they didn't stop Ninjask from pivoting, because you can't stop U-turn. They stopped it from having the late game potential that I would say it's currently known for. I think a big thing that gets people upset when trying to do a Ninjask beyond being unable to really punish it too easily is the fact that it can sweep really easily late game. You just U-turn throughout the entirety of early game and mid game. You bring in strong special breakers that take advantage of the Pokemon Ninjask draws in. Those Pokemon force damage on the opposing team, and it makes it really easy for Ninjask to clean up. But back then, because Ninjask couldn't pivot around as safely, it didn't really have that same impact on the game. Generally, you weren't as scared of Ninjask doing something, triflesome. It was a lot easier to punish Ninjask. Teams were super reliant on stacking multiple hazard removers to just, or even using Hatchram plus a defog or something, just to make sure that Ninjask wouldn't be, suffocated under Stealth Rock. But I would say it would be around when we got the first DLC and we got Dual Wing Beat, then Ninjask started getting more hype around it. People were like, oh, well, now its Rock's weakness is gone. So I guess this is just, God Pivot. And people also felt that was Sword Stance, right? Because you can just, you turn around so easily in the early game, like I was saying, you got to weaken your checks, and again, you got to bring in teammates to just generally weaken the opposing team. It became really easy for Ninjask to get these late game situations where not only was it actually like at full, because again, how are you punishing a Pokemon for pivoting when it has this lovely item right here? You couldn't. Unless you had Rocky Helmet, Ninjask was probably going to be at full health by endgame, and if it gets the Swords Dance up, then it probably was sweeping you. But I still wouldn't say that Ninjask really hit its peak until, I would say probably Snake. Because I think once we got to Snake Draft, and this is even pre like the first DLC shift wherein you got like, what, 20-ish Pokemon or something? I would say that's when Ninjask finally got its time to shine, because that was when we started seeing it on one of the more main tournament scenes. We started seeing people using it like pretty much consistently. You would get multiple Ninjask every week because it kind of just pairs well with anything. I think in general, Ninjask is a fairly easy Pokemon to justify on teams because it's a very reliable pivot, right? When you're looking at fast pivots in NU right now, if we want to draw it to, you know, the current metagame, Ninjask and Rabombi, I would say, are the two that come to mind immediately. And I do think that there's a case to make that Ninjask has usurped Rabombi in terms of the best pivot. They're both very similar in what they do, right? So Ninjask just pivots around with U-turn early game, brings in breakers to handle its checks, and those try to break through the opposing team, and then Ninjask Swords Dance is up late and sweeps. Whereas Rabombi does the same, but then tries to, you know, quiver up late. The reason I think Ninjask is, though, kind of vying with Rabombi for that #1 slot right now, though, is I think in general meta trends are more favorable towards Ninjask, whereas they're less favorable to Rabombi. So if we think about what's been going on with the metagame lately, there are some trends that like favor both of them, right? I think the decreased usage of Stunfisk Galar is a big one that helps both of them. It's not to say like Galarifisk is like bad, right? But it's not like the premier rocker or like, you know, top 2 if you want to count in Sandaconda as the #1 that it used to be. Mudsdale has taken a lot of its viability out, and I also think there's an argument to be made that a rocker isn't even necessarily necessary on a team. But yeah, a rocker's not even necessary to really use on a team. And so it's not being seen as much, and I think there's also just more. You could look to more Pokemon when you want something like a fairy check, a ground type. You know, you've got Rapidash, it's been surging a lot in usage. Weezing is just continuing to establish its spot in the metagame as like, yeah, I am a good, you know, poison type. Not a great fairy answer, but you're not O-code by the fairy moves, so you at least soft check them. But this is also where I think you can argue in that Ninjask is starting to get better than Rabombi, right? So while Galarifisk has been decreasing in usage, and that helps both of them, things that have been increasing in usage, Rapidash is a big one, I kind of alluded to there. But Rapidash being around really sucks for Rabombi, especially because we're seeing a little bit more Flame Body get used on it as well. I think Flash Fire is still really good because we've seen the surge in Rapidash usage mostly because people are looking desperately for more, you know, variety in terms of like Ninetales answers, in terms of fairy answers. Again, harkening back to the Rabombi suffering point. Flame Body is just generally annoying because Rabombi doesn't want to take even more chip damage while it's trying to pivot and maybe even use that, you know, small modicum of defensive utility that it has to switch in. But we're seeing more Rapidash get used. We're seeing more like poison types, I would say, in general. If I'm looking at NU right now and I just scroll through, oh, this is what I was trying to remember. Not even a poison type, but we'll bring back to him. We're seeing Rapidash get used more. We're seeing Alola Slash still kind of stick around. Togedemaru again falling off, but that helps both of I say both of these. Imagine there's a Rabambi here. I'd say to follow off both of these is helpful for both of them, but Rabambi suffers from other Pokemon coming up as a result of other meta trends like Rapidash, Weezing, sticking around. Sandslash Alola, I would say Ninjask has a little bit easier of a time just because you get to have a stronger U-turn versus that. Again, you talk about like Silvally Steel, if it's as it being one of the higher up Steel types, well, both Rabambi and Ninjask benefit from that about the same. I'd say Ninjask still a little bit more because your U-turn hurts it more than Rabambi's. But then the big thing that was interested here, Escavalier, I think very much hurts Rabambi a lot more than it hurts Ninjask. The nice thing for Ninjask with Escavalier is that it's not a steel type that resists flying. And so when you get those dual wing beats off as it tries to switch in, or if you're just trying to sweep late game and there's still an Escavalier around, it's a lot easier to take a Scav out. I think you do about 30 to like 35-ish with dual wing beat unboosted. And because Escavalier is generally relied on very heavily to handle a slew of strong breakers, like say Duraludon, Specs Whimsicott, Specs Rabambi if you still see one of those, it's not like it's a very hard Pokemon to wear down. And so Ninjask has a much easier time bypassing one that's, you know, maybe at like half health or so as you get to the late game. Whereas Rabambi, it's looking at Escavalier and going, ah yes, I'm going to Quiver Dance up and then do 20% to you. Yes, or 25. I think it's more on, yeah, it's like 20 to 25 if it's Spadef. But Escavalier is doing a really good job of choking out a lot of the fairy types in their viability. But Ninjask, it doesn't care. Compared to Rabambi, Ninjask has about the same time dealing with Escavalier as it would many other Pokemon. I do think you could look at Duraludon and how... It's hard to say in my eyes if Duraludon's actually getting better or worse. Because I remember seeing Kutzil talk about how he feels Duraludon is very underexplored. And I do agree with that. At the same time, I feel like people have used a lot of whack shit on it. Like bulky Iron Defense, we've seen Power Herb Solar Beam from it. It's a mon that, despite having a very limited move pool in terms of attacking moves, I feel still has a lot of roles that it could do. I mean, I've seen Scarf Foul play out of it, Scarf Rocks, Lead, Focus Sash with Steel Beam, just offensive rocks with like a Life Orb. Eject Pack is an option as well. Specs obviously is the thing I think most people would imagine Duraludon running, just because it could drop huge Draco Meteors. It's very interesting, I feel, for its potential, and that could harm Ninjask in the future, right? Because I do think Leftovers Duraludon is a pretty decent check, and I think even if you wanted to try Helmet Duraludon, that'd be a decent check to Ninjask, whereas Rabambi doesn't have those same struggles. But because Escavalier is the dominant defensive steel, I would argue at this point in time, can actually run Leftovers as well compared to Silvally Steel. Its prominence helps Ninjask out a lot because it's not getting shut out as much. And it does also help that Escavalier doesn't really run Boots as an item. At least as of now, I'm sure people will still try it. And so you are at least making progress with your U-turns, helping to at least negate the lefty's recovery that it does get just from like switching in and then healing, or maybe even to protect a little bit. And I think there's also something to say about Ninjask liking Kofagri just falling off. This wasn't ever like a super solid answer, but Kofagrigus' physical bulk is really immense. And so Ninjask doesn't exactly love trying to deal with that late. It also likes that Magneton is at least not the most relevant Pokemon, despite it being, in my eyes, a pretty okay option. I think Magneton has stayed about the same, maybe actually... Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit better than it was at the end of the pre-big DLC shift metagame. But it still isn't really stopping Ninjask. You know, I've seen one of I Light Magneton, and it didn't really convince me too much that it was a great defensive steal. And since a lot of them are Scarfed, you do just tend to beat them down over time, and because Magneton has no recovery, if you have like a spike up, you're really going to be wearing it down pretty quickly. I think that's about all I have to say about Ninjask. This wasn't the most organized talk. Yeah, it happens, man. Come on. I don't write scripts for these. What you think I am? But, I think Ninjask has had a very interesting journey throughout this tier's history. Or, throughout this tier's history, the whole 6 months it's been around. But, I think it's kind of funny to see how it went from quite literally just a meme Pokemon that you'd see on the ladder and go, ah yes, Ninjask, let me put up my Stealth Rock, and invalidate it as a Pokemon. You know, you had some, I think people tried to run Boots and they're like, Acrobatics now does no damage, damn it. But really, getting dual Wing Beat, I think, was a huge thing for it. And of course, just the addition of Heavy Duty Boots to this generation was massive for it as well. Fast Pokemon with low drawback pivoting, I think, have just been demonstrated to be super good in every tier. Like, what, I think about an OU, I think there's Zeraora, where it can run Boots and just be super obnoxious. UU, you've got like Boots Zarude running the metagame. I think at times Boots Incineroars run that metagame too. RU, I admittedly have no knowledge of whatsoever, but surely there's a Boots pivot there. You know, probably for PU as well. I'd have to think on that one a little bit more. I play a little bit of PU knowledge, is that great? Let's see, can we find a pivot in PU that might run Boots? You know, surely Morpeko has a Boots set, and I think Morpeko is somewhat highly rated on their VR, or was at one point. But you get the deal, right? These super fast, I think pivoting this generation is a lot less limited to the slower ones. Just because Boots helps these offensive Pokemon retain so much late game potential, because it gives them a lot more freedom to pivot early. Which is both good and bad. As again, you get these Pokemon like Ninjask that are just very annoying to deal with. I mean, hell, we've had people saying they think Ninjask is super like restricting to team building and should be banned. Now look, I'm willing to concede now that Ninjask is a good Pokemon. Top 10 even. I'm not willing to concede that it's ban-worthy yet, though. Like, it's weird. I think Poe mentioned how Ninjask isn't really restrictive in the sense that, oh, it's super hard to build and prep for it because, you know, lack of checks or anything. It's just, it exists. And you have to be mindful of it the whole time, otherwise it will just, you know, sweep. My thing with Ninjask is, I think a lot of Pokemon that do check it fit really well onto teams in the current metagame, like Weezing, Rotom Spin, Mudsdale. Is Jealous into Ninjask check? Kind of. If you're Will-O-Wisp, you kind of check it. Duraludon, I think, is a pretty okay pick. I enjoy it. Savali Steel. And we've also seen a little bit of a fall off in terms of Pokemon maybe Ninjask would like to take more advantage of, like, I don't know, Persian Alola. I don't know. At the same time, Frostmoth I think would have been a better one to mention. As Frostmoth got I'd say a fair bit of hype at the beginning when it first dropped. And people kind of realized it was, you know, not great. There are a lot of common Pokemon that Ninjask does keep in check, though, like, say, Gallade or Bombi, I think are the two big ones you'd look at. I think you could even argue Ninjask's prevalence is a huge reason Gallade isn't viewed in a more negative light in terms of should it be banned or should it stay. I don't know. I am very interested to see how the dialogue continues to evolve on Ninjask. Yeah, I did agree with the nomination for the VR to shift it up to A+. Maybe we see it go up to A+ next shift. Maybe when we get the second DLC, maybe Ninjask looks worse. Or maybe it even just looks better. Because I know we're getting Combuskin in the next DLC. Will Combuskin end up being something that Ninjask has to get used a lot to check? Like maybe Subtoxic or something's really good on Combuskin? Because, you know, that Mon lost Sky Uppercut. I really don't know what Combuskin's supposed to do this gen now. I think we'll see some of the moves it got. And then figure that out from there. And who knows, maybe you won't have to answer this question. I've actually seen that Ninjask is getting hype in RU. I think they ranked it on their VR at like B recently, and I think I did I see it brought in. Did I see it get brought in Snake, or did I see people saying they thought it could, that they'd bring it in? I don't know. The TLDR here is this is a legitimately good Pokemon. I'm willing to say that beyond a shadow of a doubt. I think it is really helpful as well that the metagame favors frailer offense. It's why I think things like Ninjask and Gallade are so good, because they don't have to contend with as many bulky Pokemon. That's, I think, going to be it for me here. Let me know how you feel about this absolute demon cicada and how it pivots forever and ever and ever. And it just doesn't stop pivoting. I hope you enjoy the rest of your night, morning, evening, afternoon, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever it is. I'll see you guys next time. Oh yeah, and if you are watching to this point, I might try to get that Flora Sky next episode done one day, maybe. So I just gotta get the will to like open the ROM and play it. You know. That's it for me though. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.